And speaking about perception, this media landscape is crazy right now. We see publications from Sports Illustrated to blogs and just magazines that used to cover fashion, music, art. They're all kind of struggling right now in this era of streaming or just adapting to the new media landscape, which is kind of short form video, maybe your articles or just your content is spread out through multiple platforms. There's not a real way of monetizing these things. And on top of that, you gotta consider the political landscape, the fact that we have more awareness of just, I wouldn't necessarily say woke culture, but just people are more self-aware and more considerate of other people. And it is kind of sensitive. I'm not gonna lie. We are in sensitive times and all these things kind of come into play here, but it's very interesting what's going on with the LA Times right now, because it seems like, you know, the person who originally purchased it, he has a daughter. Of course, the nepotism, he's going to put her in a key position, which I believe he should. If you own something, you should be able to put your kids in place and, you know, put them in a powerful position. Why the fuck not? That's the reason why you own it. But anyway, this billionaire's daughter is running the publication, but she's kind of running it in the quote unquote kind of social media woke culture way. And I don't believe, you know, she's kind of taken away from the business side of just making sure that, hey, this should get people reading this and people should take the information as valid information, not biased information coming from one particular side of the political or just the, I should say, political spectrum. And Adam Carolla, a guy from Comedy Central, I remember you seeing him on there. Man, that was a while ago, but he kind of has an interesting podcast. But let's check out what they had to say on the storyline of this billionaire's daughter kind of running the LA Times into the ground. And it's interesting with the children of these billionaires. We see it kind of with the Lakers out in public, with the Buss family. Once the father passed away, the kids not necessarily having the Lakers in a winning position from every season. And just overall, they can't even recruit free agents like that. LeBron actually chose to go there without them really recruiting him. He was going to go to LA the whole time. They lost out on Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, LaMarcus Aldridge. I mean, you guys can go down the history books and take a look at it. There was a lot of NBA players who originally wanted to go there, and then once they met up with them, they kind of changed their mind on it. But let's take a look at how they broke down what's going on with the LA Times. And every once in a while, I'll check in.
So what you see happening with the LA Times is kind of running in parallel with what you see about the entire publishing industry, in that it was kind of contaminated by this kind of youthful progressivism, that is just the dominant ethos of the people that work at, that have joined these organizations over the past 10, 15 years.
And it's not just because of that. We also have to consider a lot of them were running off the algorithms of Twitter and YouTube, aka Vice Media. They were actually getting a lot of their traffic because YouTube wanted to promote long form content, and they ended up promoting Vice. But once the algorithms changed, Vice actually struggled. And the same thing goes for, I would say, Complex Media with Twitter. Once Elon Musk purchased it and changed the algorithm, which he did, a lot of people were salty about it. It wasn't just the check marks. A lot of your favorite celebrities were not in favor, depending on their, I don't want to say political views, but depending on where they fell in the spectrum with Elon Musk. If they talked bad about him, trust me, they were no longer in the algorithm. When they promoted something, it didn't reach as far. But a lot of publications, I would say in the mid 2010s, actually got a boost because the social media platforms on their come up were actually promoting a lot of these media companies.
And even the older regime at these publications, even up to the New York Times, kind of drifted in the direction of the more youthful politics, right? It's almost like the tail wags the dog. And so you saw that happening with the LA Times. I mean, I have my theories on structurally why that's happened to all journalism. And I think to a certain extent, it's because with the shift from analog to digital, scarcity was released. And all of a sudden, when you go from printing 15, 17 stories a day to 200 stories a day, supply goes up and quality goes down, right? It's almost like a restaurant or a club. You have to let in more people to make the business model work. All of a sudden, the quality goes down. I think that's a major factor. So that was one factor that's present for the LA Times and just about all of the publishing. The LA Times was also one other catalyst that I think shockingly, almost nobody was aware, and that's kind of what gave rise to my thread and why it's become a popular one, in that the owner of the LA Times, a guy named Patrick Soon-Shiong, pretty low profile guy, strangely, given the things that he's involved in. He's an owner of the Lakers and an owner of the LA Times. He bought Magic Johnson's share in 2011. I forgot why Magic had to sell, but he had to sell about 5% of the Lakers. Patrick Soon-Shiong bought it. Very low profile guy for an owner of the Lakers. He buys the LA Times in 2018. As 2020 is coming along, and we see the deterioration of Los Angeles. I'm trying to investigate what's happening here, and one of the things that I see at the LA Times is that there's a very prominent voice in the editorial room, and that's Patrick Soon-Shiong's daughter, Nika. Nika is the most cliched blueprint champagne socialist, guilt-ridden rich kid that ascribes herself to progressive politics very aggressively and just the most out-of-touch, broken, bankrupt worldview. And she was being very aggressive and almost kind of running the newsroom. And you saw that.
That's very interesting. And sometimes it's unfortunate for her. She doesn't realize that she's sitting in her own privilege and everyone could see it but her. She has the room to have certain worldviews or certain ideologies that she has because of her position in life, but she's not going to be able to see it. It's very unfortunate, but I'm pretty sure she has good intentions, but it is what it is.
It popped up most evidently in 2022 because there were LA elections that year. That was right just before those, last time I was on describing this and when that thread came around. And it turns out that she's engineering some of the candidates for some of these positions in LA because they're friends of hers. It's a guy named Kenneth Mejia. He's the LA controller now. He's about 33 now. He was 31 when he was elected. He has no qualifications whatsoever, except for being friends with Nika Soon-Shiong, and was able to be engineered there because the LA Times endorsed him. Okay, had no business endorsing him. And people, as you mentioned, Adam mentions, people usually go to the LA Times for their news to see what's going on in LA. And while it no longer has the circulation or prestige it once had, in terms of endorsements and who gets elected in LA, still extremely powerful. You know how many candidates won in the 2020 elections that were not endorsed by the LA Times?
Tell us.
One person out of it's got to be at least 18 to 20 that was not endorsed by the LA Times once.
And in the mid 2010s, that's what a lot of these publications have become, major real estate for certain political candidates to come by and kind of get access to their audience. And the publications would sway that audience to actually consider that person as a quote unquote good guy. This is how politics works. It's good guy versus the bad guy, but there is no such thing, even though there's no such thing as that. But at the end of the day, these publications serve as major real estate to sway a certain audience a certain way. The LA Times is a perfect leftist newspaper where they're gonna have major real estate on that audience for Democratic candidates that are trying to run. Or something like the Daily Wire, they're gonna sway people that towards the right to vote for certain candidates, etc. These are just major real estates. That's it. I mean, as I would say, broadcast television kind of gets more antiquated and outdated, there's going to be new players. So some of that Fox News real estate is going to be taken up by the Daily Wire or just anyone in that spectrum. Same thing for CNN. The newer generations coming up, they're not necessarily watching that. They may be leftist, but they're going to gravitate towards other publications. Like that YouTube channel. I forgot what's the name of it, but they're like sort of left leaning. They're pretty popular among people who love politics or just political science majors, etc. Man, I'm not into none of that, but you guys get my drift.
The LA Times endorsements are still extremely powerful, and the people they're endorsing are just that's why LA is going in the direction that it's going in, because these are people that ascribe to a level of progressive politics that all of us sit here and our mind is blown. And how are these people being elected? Because most people don't pay attention. They go to the endorsement section of the LA Times. They see, oh, the LA Times couldn't endorse someone who is this broken or will be this.
At the end of the day, nobody has fucking time to pay attention, man. People got to go to work. People got shit to do, man. Come on, let's keep it a buck.
Harmful, and they assume it's somebody that's sufficient. That's who they vote for, and the LA Times keeps on winning. And part of it, and the people who are winning as a function of that, are somewhat forwarded by Nika Soon-Shiong.
Right. So let's give some background here. First off, with Nika. So she does consider herself an activist, has a master's in African Studies and a BA.
Dog, at the end of the day, you cannot be a fucking billionaire activist. There's no such thing. What? Oh my God. This girl doesn't even get it's a privilege for her to comfortably be a activist going to sleep in a mansion every night. I mean, God damn, this shit is crazy. But at the end of the day, hey, hopefully she's using her resources to help people out and not necessarily just kind of virtue signal her audience to saying, hey, quote unquote, I'm marketing myself as these are my beliefs, which a lot of political pundits do. That's on CNN and Fox News. They don't necessarily believe in what they believe in. They just talk it so they can make the money. A perfect example of that is Bill O'Reilly. It's all about that paper, man. How many shows that guy used to have? Come on, man.
International relations from Stanford. Despite a 137% rise in crime in West Hollywood, she was involved with defunding the sheriff's department.
And she was on the safety commission.
Yeah.
She should be serving lattes at a Pete's Coffee, but she's on the safety commission.
So and now and so even more background. So the reason that we're talking about the LA Times so much is because they just laid off a little over 20% of their newsroom, about 115 people being reported. They're saying it's because there's been about a $30 to $40 million loss in profits or in earnings, and a lot of it's because of people are going to social media now, so they got rid of their whole video department. They got rid of a lot of it. They're trimming the fat, the meat, and just really leaning out their staff.
And the LA Times, let's not cap about this. Before Elon Musk purchased Twitter, they were relying on certain algorithms to go their way. And as soon as he took over, he changed it. He definitely has changed. I see Mark Cuban actually give inside scoop of that. He knows for a fact that they changed the algorithm. So certain people and certain institutional publications don't get promoted like they used to. And a perfect example of this is Vice Media with YouTube. As soon as YouTube got their creators and their consumers to actually mess with the long form content, they no longer posted Vice Media videos in the very front of YouTube once you go to their webpage. Once that stopped, all the billion-dollar evaluations that Vice Media had, they actually had to live up to it. And when push came to shove, they really had no audience.
So I think, to put it in another sort of parlance, and I've always kind of said this, you know, you had the old guard that was in there. Now, I was very good friends with the editor-in-chief of the Times for many, many years. Still friends with him, Shelby Coffey III. And I met him in the early mid-'90s. Probably met Shelby 92. And he was the guy who ran. And he was a gray-haired white guy who was liked boxing and sports and drove a Corvette. And he and I were great friends, even though I was very low on the socioeconomic totem pole. But I was his boxing coach. And he discovered that I had some homespun wisdom, even without, he comes from D.C., I think, he runs in those circles. But he sort of was like, hey, you got some smarts, kid. And, we find ourselves having lunch and just talking about life and subjects and things like that. I remember one time telling him, because this is a long time ago, I was always pretty progressive. I was like, let's just legalize prostitution and legalize pot, like legalize drugs, like, what's the harm? And I remember he said, no, nothing's really the harm, but do you want to live in that society? And I was sort of like, yeah, I kind of get what his point is, but I don't know what his politics were, but he was a little old school and somewhat conservative in that he was pushing back on me talking about legalizing drugs and prostitution and things like that.
Sounds like most Democrats behind closed doors. Remember, I'm from New York City, man. I got no skin in this game, but that's where I was born and grew up. I'm not conservative or Democrat, but that sounds like most Democrats behind closed doors.
And that was those... He was a prototype for the guys who ran newspapers from the old school. Then he moved out, and the new school moved in. And I would describe it this way. If, back in the, 60s, 70s, whenever, what percentage of the employees of the LA Times would have been vegan? Okay, less than 1%. 1%, will be generous and round up to 1%. But what if the meat eaters started getting pushed out and the vegans started replacing them? And before you know it, it's 67% vegan. Now, what's on the menu for lunch? And it's bean curd. That's what's on. We're barbecue day and rib day and burger day and pizza day. Those are gone. It's vegan day now. And so I feel like with each graduating class of young, polluted-minded kids that are going to these places with their vegan agenda, then what's going to start? Okay, so then the lunchroom gets taken over by the vegans, and there's no more jerky treats in the vending machine. And before you know it, we start seeing more articles about the benefits of the vegan lifestyle in the newspaper. And if you just kind of use that as a metaphor, that's essentially what's happening times the nation.
Definitely, how you describe it is reflective, but I think there's two dynamics also at play. One, people, and what I mentioned about scarcity and the switch from analog to digital. Quality goes down, so does the pay and the compensation of the reporters. Thus, the quality of the reporters going down. Okay, when Shelby ran the LA Times newsroom, a job at the LA Times was difficult to get. There was a threshold to cross to get that job, and you were paid relatively well. You know, you weren't a millionaire, but you were paid pretty well. These people at the LA Times, they're glorified bloggers making $58,000, $62,000 a year, right? And a lower quality of person, a lower quality of journalist is going to take that job. So not only is it more vegans, it's more vegans who simply are less qualified and, took nutrition at Cal State Northridge instead of UCLA or USC. That's one of the things that's at play.
It's not necessarily that. It's pretty much they get boosted by the algorithm. You see, for a long time before Elon Musk purchased Twitter, and Facebook, it does the same thing to a degree. Instagram, Snapchat. If you promote certain ideologies, you do get promoted and you do get viewed in a higher light in these social media platforms. There's no doubt about it.
Two, and I think a lot of people who are a little more surface only surface aware of these types of issues always think it's top down, that these types of things happen because there might be an editor or a family or an owner that believes these things, and that's what influences the paper. But what was on point about what you said is that it's actually bottom up, and that with more vegans in the newsroom or more people who ascribe to these politics, it doesn't matter who's running it, right? Because they're pressuring the bosses. Because the interesting thing about this recent chaos and drama with the LA Times is the senior editor resigned, and that's what set off a lot of the media blitz about what's going on there. A big Hollywood Reporter article, and a guy named Kevin Merida, who was only 3 years in the job at the Los Angeles Times. Patrick Soon-Shiong apparently recruited this guy heavily to run the LA Times. I don't recall what his prior job was, but he's very well regarded in the journalism world. Apparently he was recruited, here's $1 million a year and come live in Patrick Soon-Shiong's $75 million house guest room. And that's how he convinced Kevin Merida to take this job. Merida was pushing back against Nika and the more progressive, younger cohort at the LA Times, and finally about a week ago he couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah, so I think about, and maybe in this particular case there's so much independent wealth that it really can be a lost leader for these guys. But I always sort of generally subscribe to the argument that everything is sort of economically sort of shaped or pushed or something. And so more metaphors, but if I got myself an In-N-Out burger franchise, not in Oakland, because they had to move. By the way, that's the
Or else you get fucking robbed over there at that In-N-Out burger. Better not play.
only In-N-Out franchise ever in 75 years to shutter their doors and
So
windows.
sad.
One. Okay, Oakland.
That'd
What a
be the one.
shocker.
That'd be the one.
That'd be the one. Okay, but let's defund that police. So Bud Light, it happened kind of overnight, but there are many examples of many publications that are starting a long, slow decline and slide in revenue and readership and stuff. How come there's no point where somebody pumps the brakes and goes, we're not in the hummus business, people.
Because the algorithms on those social media platforms promote that ideology, even if it doesn't make money. That's the problem. The perception of what the audience wants, it's one way on social media, but in real life, when you have to monetize some of those articles and some of those concepts, they don't work. All it is just basically virtual signaling certain trendy topics or just trendy things to do or say on social media. But that doesn't necessarily translate to clicks. You're going to get retweets or just reposts, etc. But no one's actually clicking and reading these articles full through. or even watching videos or whatever short form content they're posting out.
And Adam, you and I talked about this the last time because you asked me, what's the business model of this? And I said, how's the business model working? And I said, the business model is the owner's so rich it doesn't matter.
Right.
And so the tagline, go woke, go broke. Okay, fair enough. That does end up eventually being true a lot of the time, but it
really should be go woke, look at your analytics. Matter of fact, you put anything out there, you should be looking at your analytics. And very unfortunate, but a lot of companies are not necessarily doing that. They're kind of riding the coattails of just being on the right side, or just knowing someone in the back end at Instagram, or knowing someone in the back end on Twitter, etc. And they're hoping that their posts will get a certain boost. But none of this is translating to real money.
matters the timeline. It matters how long can you be woke until you go broke, right? And that shows you that while economic incentives and economic factors do eventually win out, cultural factors are very powerful. And what's happening with SI, when the managing editor of the swimsuit edition, and she's got 85,000 Instagram followers, and she goes and puts a tranny on and a overweight woman on the cover of the Sports Illustrated issue, and her comments on Instagram are all these, Goop membership subscribers talking about how amazing it is that she's being so inclusive with the swimsuit edition.
Exactly. And those people are not customers of the magazine. The actual customers and guys who buy those magazines are not going to spend that money. That's not what they want. Once again, the virtue signaling online is a powerful fucking tool. Man, social media overall, man, it's fucking powerful as hell, man. Got these fucking fake ass Fortune 500 companies about to go broke.
She's going to sit there and think that she's right, even if the numbers are going down, right? So there's resistance to the economic incentives because there's such a powerful cultural incentive recently, and that is what happened with the LA Times. But like you said, your philosophy eventually wins out because apparently the Soon-Shiong, the mother of the Soon-Shiong family, Michelle Soon-Shiong, she was the one most bothered by their losses. Apparently, the inside baseball was that at a board meeting sometime in the last year, she lost it and was lamenting, we're writing $1 million check a week to keep this business in operation. We can't do this any longer. And that, Patrick Soon-Shiong is probably sitting there saying, okay, well, I'll lose $300-400 million. I'll still be there with about $6-7 billion. Nika Soon-Shiong certainly doesn't care. She'd rather have this as her woke platform and amplification of her worldview. But Michelle, luckily for us, Michelle Soon-Shiong likes to, embrace reality a little bit more. And she eventually had it and said, we can't keep on losing $50 million a year.
Seems like her mama is right. He knows at the end of the day, the dad is not going to say no to the daughter. He has more than enough money to keep it afloat for a while until she kind of gets out of that phase of just, kind of being this woke progressive, not realizing that she's actually lamenting and just basking in her privilege every day.